This episode of the Framework Podcast is brought to you by the City of Detroit's Planning and Development Department. Hey there, everyone. Welcome to the Framework Podcast. This is your friendly neighborhood city planner, Rashidul Hassan Tipan. Our guest today is Michelle Jahra McKinney. Michelle Jahra McKinney is the director of Detroit Sound Conservancy and an archivist, librarian, singer, and community historian. Her mission is to make cultural history come alive and be accessible to all. As a Detroiter, she has pursued this mission for over 50 years. She worked with her late husband Harold McKinney to produce Detroit Jazz Heritage Performance Lab and continues to work with several community, theater, music ensemble, and nonprofit arts organizations. She holds a master's in library and information science from Wayne State University and a certificate of archival administration. Today, she continues to bring the community together and help people express their beautiful legacies. The Detroit Sound Conservancy is currently in the process of rehabilitating the Bluebird Inn. It was a historic building that was the epicenter of jazz music and housed giants such as John Coltrane, Charlie Parker, and Miles Davis. We talked with Michelle not only about her experience growing up in Detroit, but also about how she hopes the rehabilitation of the Bluebird Inn will revive the rich arts and culture of the midwest-tireman neighborhood, and how important it is to preserve it for its future generation. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did making it. Here's me talking to Michelle Jahra McKinney. Hi, Michelle. Thank you for your time and joining us in today's episode of the Framework Podcast. One common question that I ask my guests is, how long have you been a resident of Detroit? And could you share an interesting childhood memory of the neighborhood you grew up in?
Well, I've been a lifelong resident of Detroit, and as I'm in my late 60s now, that's been for a while. And the neighborhood I grew up in was what can I say? It had several different types of people in it. I mean, there were whites there. There were a lot of Jewish people there, and I think they were either German or Russian Jewish. I was so young, I couldn't analyze their accent, but they lived on my same block. And I remember going to the store for my mother, the corner store, and this woman, she would kind of rush out of her house with a tray of cookies, and she would give us cookies way to the store. And we would be munching them really quite happily until my mother found out. I guess one of us came home with the cookie in our hand, and she said, "Oh, you don't eat from strange people's kitchens. No, you don't. You can't accept the cookies anymore." She asked us what house was it. She went over and told that woman not to give us any more cookies, which was very disappointing to me, but because she was a beautiful elder lady, and she just loved us kids. She had a twinkle in her eye. So I grew up in an integrated neighborhood, and the people all pretty much knew each other. I knew all the kids on the block, and we were like a natural gang. We had kids from Indonesia, Thailand. We had the Jewish kids. We had the black kids. And we had the white kids. So we really had a little UN going on there. Irish, a lot of Irish people in that neighborhood, Polish. Yeah, it was a little UN.
And which neighborhood was that?
I lived on Gladstone, which is it's just above Midtown. It's near what they call Rosa Parks Boulevard here, which in that days, that was 12th Street. And I lived right down the street from Linwood. So I was between 12th Street and Linwood, and about maybe 2 blocks north of Claremont. So it was, a lot of residential homes there.
Mm.
single homes in LaSalle Gardens Boulevard. It had some of these big, huge houses. We lived right around the corner from Aretha Franklin and her
Oh,
family. And
okay.
I also lived down the street because their mother was on LaSalle, but it was bordered by Gladstone, Wendell Harrison's mother. And Wendell Harrison is a jazz master and a reeds and saxophone player. So I knew his family. But I never found out for years that Miss Asali was his mama, because at that time he was older and he was out of Detroit.
It's interesting when you just kind of just said that we used to live next to Aretha Franklin. Like, I find that so fascinating because it's actually the second time I heard somebody kind of say that. So I have been an admirer of the Detroit Sound Conservancy from afar and the work all you've been doing at the Bluebird Inn, almost during the beginning phases of the Midwest-tireman neighborhood framework. But before we get to that, could you share with our audience who are not Detroit based, what is the Detroit Sound Conservancy and their mission statement, and how it started?
The Detroit Sound Conservancy is a nonprofit and is a music archives and kind of advocacy institution building thing that we're doing. And it's dedicated to the preservation and celebration of Detroit and its music of the past, the present, and the future. So our mission statement is through archival practices, education programs, performances, and the rehabilitation of places such as the Bluebird Inn. The DSC is expanding access to the history of Detroit music and evidence of the history of Detroit music that proves Detroit is the most influential music city in the world. There are so many different types of genres of music that Detroit musicians have influenced. So our archives collects material and recordings from all genres. So we don't do just jazz or just punk or just electronic or just we are welcome and open to any kind of Detroit music, whether it's blues, country, dance music. I'm talking about like African dance music, experimental music, folk, gospel, hip hop, house, Latin, R&B. What else?
Mm-hmm.
What else? Rock, soul, techno, all of that. So if you are a Detroit music maker, you can donate your collection here to save it for the legacy. So this is community archiving. It's not like, we want to be the gatekeeper. You're going to be the gatekeeper of your own stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
not the archives. So this archives is definitely a community-based archive that's for all music genres in Detroit. Now I had to tell you a quick story. I was married. Well, I am the widow of a
I was
great
gonna get
jazz
to that.
musician named Harold Yeah, so he was dying. He had all these strokes, and so I was in the hospital. They gave me a cot, and so I would sit in the room with him and talk to him and sing and do whatever I was doing. But he was in a coma, and so when he did finally die 10 days later, I went back home, but I didn't continue my life. So I didn't wash clothes. I didn't cook too much. I didn't do anything. My children had moved out by then. So I was there by myself. And after about a month or so, I said, I guess I better act like I'm going to be living. And I went down with a bundle of dirty clothes down to the basement to wash. And it was shiny. I could see something shiny. I said, what's that? I go down there and it's just black water.
Mm-hmm.
It had risen up and it had destroyed so much of Harold's music that he had stored in the basement. We didn't know that you're not supposed to store that kind of stuff in the basement. I lost probably about maybe half of his collection. He had wrote like 300 pieces. So we lost a lot of stuff. So meanwhile, I had finally gotten a job at the Charles H. Wright Museum as an archivist. Became an archivist because I went around to the repository to try to get help to restore some of the music that I had pulled out of the water. And they told me that number one, they didn't have the money. It took a lot of money to recover that kind of stuff because his tapes were in there too, and they were covered with mold. And then they also, some of them said, well, we don't collect Black people. In other words, they said Black musicians from Detroit are not in our collecting scope. So we were underrepresented in the repositories for either one of those two reasons. So I was really angry about that. So meanwhile, I ran into this young guy from Port Huron, Carlton Goltz, and he said that he had run into the same problem, that he couldn't find any of the current Detroit Black musicians or hardly any Detroit music in any of the repositories. And I said, so, wow, what can we do about this? He said, we should start our own company. I said, yeah, we should start our own company. And so he went and incorporated Detroit Sound Conservancy in 2012. And we got it to be a 501c3, and I was one of the founding board members. So that's how we started. And we started because of a lack of something that was missing in Detroit and that we hope to correct.
So I'd like our audience to know that Michelle referred to her late husband as Harold McKinney, a pianist who played with jazz greats including Charlie Parker, Miles Davis, and John Coltrane. I would be remiss if I did not just put it out there. And obviously, he's a legend among the Detroit community. So these records that we're talking about are not your regular family records. They're really a part of history. It's interesting how the journey for Detroit Sound Conservancy started with a few box of records and a flooded basement. And here we are today. So for the Midwest-tireman framework, we look at the neighborhood through what we call framework elements. These elements are neighborhood and housing, business and retail, streets and mobility, parks and open spaces, and finally, industrial development. However, it was always important for us that all these elements are rooted in the people, culture, and history of the neighborhood. And when it comes to history, buildings like the Bluebird Inn, Hakamma Club, play a big role in the arts and culture of the neighborhood. For our audience who may not know about the Bluebird Inn, can you give us a quick history lesson of the Bluebird Inn and its role in the art and culture scene of the Midwest-tireman community?
Okay, so imagine you're some sharecroppers that have come up to Detroit for the promise of the Ford people saying they get $5 a day. So that brought a flood of people up here. And part of that flood was a Dubois family. And they came up and they were able to have their little savings. He worked, I guess, in the car industry, and they saved money and were able to buy the Bluebird Inn, and that's what he named it. And the Bluebird was right on the red line that separated the Black community from the white community. And Tireman is that border. And that's the top of the northern border to the old West Side. And so it was the actual line that delineated where you could or could not go. And lucky for us, the Bluebird Inn was on the right side. And it was a place where Black people could go safely and relax. They used to go after church on Sunday and have their gloves on and their little hats and go there and have breakfast and have a wait service. There was a wait staff there that waited on the people and made them feel like $1 million after church. And evolved, finally, the Du Bois family sold it to the Clarence and Mary Eddins. So it opened as a neighborhood jazz club in the 1930s. And the Bluebird Inn turned into a place where not only could you bring your wife and enjoy some good music, it also was a place where you could hear music that was different from the dance music. You could come to hear you could listen to the listening type of music, which was the bebop. And bebop developed there. It was like a schoolhouse almost. It was like a epicenter. And then when the jazz music was there, the young people would cluster at the back door, and the guy would let them in and let them sit near the stage when the stage had been changed from the front to the back of the club. They let the little kids in so they could listen. And they got into relationships with some of the wonderful jazz players that were there. Wendell Harrison talks about such a thing, that he met these musicians from all around the world. So jazz drummer Roy Brooks, he was one of the young lions, they used to call him back in those days. He was there playing behind people like Charlie Parker and Miles Davis. There's a picture of Cannonball Adderley, Charlie Parker, and Miles Davis. Not all in the same picture, but John Coltrane was in that picture with Cannonball Adderley and Charlie Parker. They all came through theirs. And Detroit has a great tradition in the jazz community, at least, of mentorship. If they saw that you were serious about your music, no matter how badly you played, they would take you under their wing. So all of those wonderful people would come through and sing. And there's a guy who is the head of the jazz department at Michigan State University who used to play there. His name is Rodney Whitaker. And Professor Whitaker would always talk about the acoustics at the Bluebird Inn. It was such wonderful acoustics that people loved to play there. Just because of that, the music was so strong and present, and it was well done. So all of that went on through the 50s, and they did an archaeological research project from Wayne State, and they found some papers that had been stuck in the roof, in the ceiling, and one of the ceiling tiles, and down came all these business papers. So it revealed the details of how they shopped with other Black merchants in the city, and how they were hooked up to the Nakarima Club, to the Black grocers, that they kept turning this money in the neighborhood over and over again. They were part of the system of Detroit, how Black people actually made it with that Black ingenuity in Detroit. The Bluebird Inn was one of the nerve centers.
Yeah, thank you for that fascinating time travel experience. You just had a ground blessing ceremony and celebration back in September of 2023. Could you share with us what plans the Detroit Sound Conservancy has for the Bluebird Inn?
Oh yeah, I could talk about some of that.
Sure.
Basically, what we did, what I have been doing, is going to the meetings that the Block Club, the United Block Club Council, and some of the stuff, the churches. I've been to their meetings and things, and listened to what they talked about they needed. Like they were trying to advocate against that school over there being closed. So I went to those meetings, and there is really a paucity of places for children to go, after school, for instance. So one of the programs that we would put in place would be to have some kind of after school program where the children can come in and have like a homework house, where maybe we could have a tutor there, so that they could work on their homework until their folks come home. So those kinds of services would be there. And beyond that, having, some kind of small grill there, or some kind of place, something, that they could eat a little bit, some kind of maybe soup and salad bar, or a hamburger grill, or something simple, sandwiches and stuff like that. We'd have that. and we'd have the community space during the week. And then on the weekend, we would have the bar open and have the regular kind of Bluebird music venue. But I think that we would have the music venue have several kinds of music in there: electronic music, jazz and blues, maybe a singer's night. So we'd have certain events that would happen monthly that people could say, okay, I'm gonna go hang out. I know they have such and so at the Bluebird to that on this day.
Right.
So that kind of programming. And in the back, we would have the archives. Our physical archives are presently here at the WGPR radio station, 107.5 on East Jefferson. This is where we are right now. When we get that Bluebird finished, say in 12 to 18 months, then we're going to move this collection there. And they're building a mezzanine so that there'll be another floor so that we could put the collections up there, especially the more collections that would probably not get used as much or that are still being processed. And downstairs, we could have the library, and because we have a nice music library, and we also have other collections that may be of use, like the biographies of Detroit musicians and things that people could write reports on. If you're in high school and you have to do a report, you could find the information of that person, that musician, in our archives. So we would have what you call a vertical file, where they could get wide-ranging information, like a reference file, where you could find out about places and subjects and biographies or administrative histories about Detroit music organizations and people and advocates, like the Black engineers or engineers, period, who work in the sound studios. That's what would be available to the community once we get that archives over there. And you wouldn't have to be a researcher, a scholar with a book that you're writing, and you can only access this stuff if you have these credentials. No, I know there are some archives that act that way, but this would be genuinely for the community and for their information because it's their story.
Yep, totally. And it, first of all, the notion that at one time sound of Miles Davis' trumpet reverberated in the interior walls of the building, and that one day we may be able to walk into that premise just blows my mind. I'll be one of the first people who's gonna be very interested to walk in. So as part of the framework, the Bluebird Inn fits nicely to this aspect of a hub for learning and healing. This is not only because of how the revival of the building will impact the community, but also because of its proximity to the Sampson Weber School and the currently inactive Biddle School site in the neighborhood. Considering the rich music history of the Bluebird Inn, I am curious to hear your thoughts on how you hope the Bluebird Inn will impact the near and long-term future of the community.
Well, when you mentioned the schools, that is another dream of mine, to connect the music instructors. Only certain schools that have a full music program, like Renaissance or Cass Tech and the Detroit School of the Arts. But those schools need feeder schools. I mean, that's how the system worked in the past, where an instructor, sometimes they were from the symphony orchestra back in the day when Detroit had the nation's primo music curricula. They would have professional musicians teaching in the schools or being available for private lessons, and go and keep moving up to another level, so that by the time a kid hit high school, they were at least fluent on their instrument, and they could read music, so that by the time you graduated from high school, a typical Detroit student was like a college level music student And this is how my husband, Harold McKinney, described the music program in the Detroit schools when he grew up. And that's where he got his chops together. So I would love to have an arrangement with the middle schools in the area and even the elementary schools to start the kids off again, that lessons would be available to them through some musicians that we could have as artists in residence.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely plays into kind of how we've also understood and observed how that particular junction works, and therefore the idea of hub that's for learning and healing. It really just plays into that in a very organic way. So, Michelle, I know you have a busy schedule, and I can't thank you enough for the time that you've given us. But by now, our audience knows what my final question is. And if there ever was a time when this question was appropriate, I would say this is it. So, Michelle, my question to you is, if you had to describe Midwest-Tireman as a song, what would it be?
Oh my God. Have you ever heard of this thing called spiritual jazz?
No.
Spiritual jazz was a type of jazz that arose in the 70s. But the song that I'm thinking of is called "The Creator Has a Master Plan. Peace and happiness through all the land." That tune right now, that would be the tune that would describe all of this. Because it's just evident that all these different threads are coming together to weave this new resurgence of this community. So I just say the Creator has a master plan. That would be the song.
So who can you tell me who was the musician behind it? Like
Pharoah Sanders.
Okay.
That was the guy. And he recently passed. That was his tune. Pharoah Sanders with Leon Thomas singing it.
You know, it's interesting. Your answer has been, how do I put it, very interesting. And I think it is mainly because of your background in kind of archival history and the work that you're doing with just preserving the oral history and the music of Detroit. You know, a lot of the suggestions for music that I've asked, it's always been very hopeful and kind of very much rooted in how the community sees itself. Like in its most trying moments, they still find strength in togetherness.
That's for sure. That's for sure.
So yeah, thanks for that very unique suggestion. As always, like rooted in context. So Michelle, thank you for your time and sharing your thoughts on the community and Detroit. Where can people find you on the internet?
If they go to detroitsound.org, they will find us.
Michelle, it's been a pleasure talking to you and getting to know you. This is Rashidul Hassan Deepan signing off. Take care, Detroit. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please visit www.detroitmi.gov/midwest-tireman/ for the latest updates and episodes on the Midwest-Tireman framework. You can also follow us on Instagram at Detroit_PDD.